Was ist gut? Ein Podcast des Deutschen Designerclubs.
Die Urbanisierung der Erde schreitet unaufhaltsam voran. Im Jahr 2030 werden Schätzungen zufolge 60% der Menschen auf diesem Planeten in Städten leben. Die überall wachsenden Metropolen sind eine große Herausforderung für die Lebensqualität und unsere Umwelt, denn sie gelten oft als Dreckschleudern, als Emissionsquelle von Lärm und Luftverschmutzung. Aber könnten sie auch CO2-senkend sein? Vielleicht auch Biodiversitätsparadiese? Könnten Städte positive Faktoren in unserem Ökosystem werden? Willkommen im DDCAST. Mein Name ist Ronald Kirsch. In der letzten Woche sprachen wir mit Marcel Theine über eine der zentralen Themen der Designbranche, die kluge und nahtlose Verbindung von Design und Content. Heute geht es in eine andere Dimension. Es geht um nachhaltigen Städtebau, und zwar radikal nachhaltigen Städtebau, der Städte zu positiven Faktoren in unserem Ökosystem machen will. Unser Gast ist Stefano Boeri, Architekt und Stadtplaner. Er ist Professor für Stadtplanung am Politecnico di Milano und leitet das Future City Lab an der Tongji-Universität in Shanghai. Dort wird die Mutation der großen Metropolen der Welt aus der Perspektive der Biodiversität und der städtischen Forstwirtschaft erforscht. Stefano baute 2014 in Mailand ein Hochhaus namens Bosco Verticale, übersetzt vertikaler Wald, das in der ganzen Welt als Symbol und zugleich als gebauter Beleg für eine andere grüne Großstadtarchitektur gilt. Wir haben in unseren Shownotes für euch zahlreiche Links zu seinen Projekten zusammengestellt, die viele Anregungen zu den Themen Design, Architektur, Städtebau, Stadtplanung oder Baupolitik enthalten. Stefano Boeri wird auf der diesjährigen Munich Creative Business Week als Keynote Speaker beim Design Summit am 13. Mai 2024 im Munich Urban Collab sprechen. Der insgesamt 9-tägige Design-Event gilt als Plattform für neue Ideen, Trends und Kreativität und steht in diesem Jahr unter dem Motto How to Create with Nature. Weitere Infos dazu findet ihr unter mcbw.de. Nun aber zum Gespräch meines Kollegen Georg Christoph Bertsch mit Stefano Boeri.
Yes, great to have you here in the studio, Mr. Boeri. I'm very happy to have you as a guest.
It's my pleasure.
Good. Where are you right now?
I am in Milano in my studio with my colleagues working as basically.
Working like always.
Yeah.
Your book, Transforming BioCities, Designing Urban Spaces Inspired by Nature, was published this year. It's a very fascinating book. And it's a collective approach with 4 more editors, Giuseppe Scarascia, Mugnozza, Vignente Gaillard, Fabio Salbitano, Giovanna Ottaviani Almo. This is a transdisciplinary approach. But what is the key message that you would like to transform to the readers?
Well, the key message is that the city should understand that in the next year, they have to decide what to do, or they remain simply the origins of global warming and climate change, since they produce basically the 70-75% of the CO2 which is present in our atmosphere and which is at the origin of global warming. Or they decide to remain the victims, the first victim of the disadvantages, of the consequences of global warming. Just think how what's happening in the coastal metropolitan environment with all the flooding risk and also catastrophes produced by extreme meteorological accidents and so on. Or they have the courage and the awareness to become the protagonist of a worldwide campaign to slow down global warming. So I believe cities are much more than state and nations, the possible protagonist of radical change. That's why BioCity is a book. It's at the same time, let's say, a necessity or a perspective, a new perspective on cities. We are used to say biocities are cities hosted by nature rather than nature hosted by cities. We are used to say that, well, in biocities, green and blue components are understood to be assets rather than costs. So all this is simply to, let's say, to straighten this concept of cities that should accept to be the protagonist of a new way to observe the survival of our species in the planet.
I think in this book you differentiate 10, I would call it, systemic functions of biocities. First, it's the biocity as a carbon sink, the self-sufficient biocity. So let's start with this. What is the self-sufficiency of a biocity? How can a city be self-sufficient?
Well, self-sufficiency is something that could be observed from many different points of view. I prefer to observe this also starting from the very, very small scale of the single buildings. So 20 years ago, together with Jeremy Rifkin, at the Venice Biennale, Architectural Venice Biennale, we have launched a manifesto trying to, let's say, suggest the hypothesis that every building could become a clean energy plant, capable to absorb the energy of the sun, the energy of the wind, to, let's say, to use the underwater water, to, let's say, really produce clean energy and distribute it all around. I think that this manifesto was probably a little bit too anticipating the condition that today we have. So basically, I believe that when we talk about the future of city, what makes this perspective extremely intriguing that at the same time we're talking about a very large and complex organism, but in other words is a palimpsest of, let's say, processes, of intentions, of projects, of legacies from the past. And we talk about something which could be related to the small and middle-sized scale of every single building. That's why I believe that the future of city is also strictly related with retrofitting, how we could intervene, changing the nature of a larger number of obsolete energy-consuming buildings, not only investing only in new construction.
Another, for me, very important aspect is the description of the biocity as an urban-rural balanced structure. So what is this balance about the urban and the rural space? You've got the peri-urban space, you've got the rural space, you've got the urban space, but this balance between urban and rural is something really interesting for me.
Well, absolutely. I believe that we have to, let's say, accelerate something that is already happening. That is the fact that we are more and more aware that this drastic distinction between urban sphere and the natural sphere is basically over. So all our attempts to put living nature outside our body, outside our cities, outside our buildings, it's over. And this is also in reason of what we have understood in this dramatic period of the pandemic, where microorganism was capable to change the life of basically all the individuals all over the world. So we have, I believe, understood that this dichotomy, this binary way to observe the relation between artificial and nature, it's over. It's a obtuse and stupid way to see the world and to see our role in the world. So when we talk about cities, we talk about a habitat that in the last centuries has become basically a mineral habitat. And it's a very hyper-specialized habitat that our species have chosen for our life. So we know that more than 62% of humanity live in cities nowadays. So the point is, and the challenge is, what could we do in order to reintroduce living nature? That means to learn to cohabit with other living species. And this is not only for plants. This is also for other kind of living species. And that's a very, let's say, complex. I'm not saying that it's an easy decision. It's very complicated, but necessary decision, because we need this kind of cohabitation. We need for many reasons. We need because plants are helping us to absorb the CO2 that we have already produced, because plants are helping us to, let's say, absorb also the air pollution that is in the air. And then I think we have to reintroduce biodiversity in our cities, because it's a way also to reinforce our antibodies and our capacity to, let's say, anticipate and resist to possible future pandemics. So for this and many other reasons, we have to rebalance the relation between cities and living nature. And at the same time, I think we have also to, let's say, consider how forests, agricultural fields, and artificial environment could be combined in a different way. And this is what we are trying to do also when we are proposing new urban settlements from our, let's say, professional perspective.
What I find very interesting is you said in the beginning, cities should understand this or that. So as if cities were subjects. But cities aren't subjects. Cities are very complex social entities.
I believe they are, let's say, in two main ways. In a very formal way, probably the less important, but at the same time quite interesting. If you observe what has happened since Paris COP15 in 2015, where basically where nations that are trying to promote a very large campaign to tackle down global warming. Nowadays, for instance, in Dubai, in these days, or last year in Sharm, are a network of cities, the real protagonists of this attempt. So network like C40 or 100 regeneration cities. So there are network of cities that are, let's say, coming from different geographical basins, or simply because they are part of some worldwide network of association, like we have done with the forum on urban forest, which we have promoted in Washington 2 months ago, where cities were protagonists, and there is a network of cities that are pushing in the direction of urban forestry. So, but it's always cities that are taking care of that. And then there is another reason that I think to make cities so important, and this is that today we cannot separate the challenge of ecological transition with the other challenge of reducing of inequalities. It is going to be one of the main, and still the main issue also on the table let's say in these days in Dubai, or last year in Sharm, where all the issue about loss and damage has become the main point of any possible discussion of future ecological transitions. So, and this is already about cities. If the question is cities as a single subject, that's a very important point. I believe we can answer yes. We can answer yes because from a symbolic point of view, the sense of being part of belonging, that is so important in the identity of a city, in the collective imaginary of citizens. When a city decides to take a clear position let's say, to root a vision on a series of public policies that are shared at that very point. At the very point, there is an amazing, let's say, energy that comes up, a kind of bottom-up energy that makes the city, which is, as you are saying, a multitude of individuals. Well, but in this very moment, cities could become a subject. And let's say with an idea. It's connected with a tension between being a multitude and sharing one vision. When you share a vision, you are, let's say, forcing or let's say pushing in the direction of becoming one subject, one soul, if you want. So this is always a very
this is a very
learning issue, but it's true what you are saying. It's true.
It is also I would say an Italian understanding of the city as a subject, as they have the traditional Italian or European city seen as a subject, being able to communicate with each other. But
well, Italy is also, but Germany is the same. If Italy and Germany are sharing this, let's say, variety of cities, each one of them has its identity, history, sometimes also language. No, so it's a. We know we are both countries where cities are more important, in my opinion, than regions, and sometimes also than the concept of being a nation. So I think it's true, and I think that nobody more than us, Italians and Germans, could understand how city could become important in the future.
Now we are in Frankfurt, and Frankfurt has been a free imperial city for centuries. So this is also interesting because also in contrast to Munich, which was a monarchic central capital.
I know very well. That's the reason I love Frankfurt. We are now coming to Frankfurt because we are now will design the Italian pavilions for the next book fair in October. Because Italy will be the main there, so we are now studying how to represent Italy, contemporary Italy.
Let's see, this social aspect or the city as a subject brings me to this last aspect in this differentiation of 10, namely biocities for all. This is, from my point of view, this is the most ambitious aspect. How do you really construct something, plan something, or interact in order to create something which is offering a better life, which should be the promise for all?
This is absolutely important because policies for ecological transition too often focus on designing privileged places. No? So this is a very important point. That we can design places that are, let's say, equipped for all the needs of daily life, immersed in greenery, let's say free from parking lots, surrounded by utilities and services useful for the daily life of citizens. But the point is that without making our cities fairer or more equal, more, let's say, capable of distributing the benefits of cleaner air, abundant drinking water, balanced diet to all citizens, and not just to small minorities. Let's say any kind of possible ecological transition is impossible. So this is for me a very clear issue. Without cities that let's say try to address the cultural, social, economical imbalances, trying to, let's say, to balance this inequalities, no ecological transition is possible. So this is a very important point.
This brings me to another, that's maybe one of the last questions, because your name, the family name, was famous through your mother, Stefano Boeri, in design, which I think is very important to see, because she was one of the first female founders of a relevant design studio in Italy. So you must have been brought up in a family or in an ambience where diversity, gender equality, and so on have been relevant political aspects in daily discussion, let's say around the dinner table or whatever. So what is in this early experience of diversity and gender equality, which developed your personal passion for this bio topic? So this is something that I'm personally interested in, because I was always fascinated by the work of your mother. And now I've got the chance to talk to you, who is a famous architect today, can reflect on that.
And that's a important and at the same time delicate issue. But, well, my mother designed in the 70s a small house in a forest nearby Milano called La Casa nel Bosco, the house in the woodland. And she was designing the layout of the house, let's say, respecting the roots of the trees. So it's a really great and amazing settlement principle that she was following. And well, if I have to remember how my mother was influencing me in this obsession for trees, I cannot forget that the very moment, the very experience was for me very important. That's it. Then, for sure, family is always a very complex, interactive collective of people. So my father was a neurologist, and I learned a lot, let's say, how he was trying to let's say, to see the connection between neurological synapses and physiological, let's say, components of the brain. So this way to always observe the relation between materiality and materiality, also in the urban processes, in a way was influenced by his view, by his perspective, his point of view on let's say, on life, on creativity, for instance. So, but for sure, my mother was very important as a model of elegance, a model of also, let's say, courage, because you are true. She was one of the few female that was a protagonist of history of architecture and furniture design. And I decided to become an architect when she invited me in California, and we went together to visit an amazing Louis Kahn project, the Folk Institute, designed by Kahn nearby San Diego. And I remember well that walking in this amazing place where you were feeling the presence of the ocean but not seeing it, but thanks to this series of superimposed platform that Kahn designed, you really were, let's say, in presence of the ocean without seeing the ocean. So I remember well that I understood the energy and the force of architecture. And that was the moment I decided to become an architect, although I did my best to not become an architect because I didn't want to follow my mother's steps. So I wanted to become before a biologist, and then I tried to see all the possibilities of let's say, of university career, but finally understood that was my serious aim goal was to become an architect. Yeah.
This because before we get to the end or to our final question, I've got one thing. I think the combination between neuropsychology and the elegance that you attribute to their mother is something that explains a little bit.
Yeah, no, I believe that the elegance my mother had is for me absolutely something that I will never reach. It's really amazing, and she was capable to maintain an amazing elegance in all what she has done. So that was something absolutely precious and unique.
Then I have, this is not a question, but rather an observation, because the title of the other book, Green Obsession.
Yeah.
This has, from my point of view, this has got something to do with Italianità. maybe Germans would have called it green technology. Americans would have called it green business
because
chances.
there is a kind of passionate energy in an obsession. Obsession is not simply oscillation. So I think technology is connected with oscillation and passion is connected with obsession. If I can see a difference. Well, it is true. An obsession is normally considered, let's say, a risk or like a kind of bad side of our intelligence and our, let's say, also personal experience. It is not true. I believe that in our profession, obsession could be extremely useful as tools in order to follow with coherence some direction. And in my personal case, the obsession for trees were very important from the beginning of my life. So I'm used to say that, for instance, the book I read when I was 13, who was a book written by Italo Calvino, The Baron on the Trees, was very important because it was located where my father was born. So in Liguria, in the western side of the Ligurian coast, and was written by Italo Calvino, who was for me a maestro. And the story of the book was about a young duke that at a certain moment, when he was 12, decided to abandon the family and the very, very boring father, and to spend the rest of his life on the branch of the trees, of the oaks, of the olives that were, let's say, the main species, species of the part of Italy. And that's perspective, that capacity, that decision to observe the life filtered by the leaves at the branch was very important, and probably like a kind of, let's say, hidden obsession that became more visible only in the last years, but was always present in my point of view in life. So green obsession is also a passion.
But quoting Italo Calvino, and I've got necessarily have to point out to Invisible Cities, because this is about imagination.
Yeah, it is true. It is true. I prefer Calvino's book on fantastics, on let's say how he was talking about tales, about, let's say, popular stories and so on. But Invisible Cities, well, sure, is a masterpiece. And yeah, okay. But as architects, we are working with visible phenomena and visible physical characters.
If you allow me to wrap this up, I think the combination between this systemic approach and your obvious capacity to do not only think, but also construct buildings and cities on the background of the family history that we just touched, and this history
you are absolutely right. So I think that also when we talk about the relation between space and society, between, let's say, physical assets and social behaviors, we are talking about this, let's say, balance and complex equilibrium between human actions and physical assets of a city. Yeah, which is a palimpsest of let's say, action done by people that were living before us.
No, this is also always the question: who do we believe can really drive this important change, this great transformation? And I'm really happy that we had this conversation, because I think this is not only the transdisciplinary approach that I quoted in the beginning with the partners who wrote this BioCities book. It's also the integration of art, sociology, medicine, elegance, and everything that you're radiating. And I think this is because we have to ask ourselves, who are those who can drive this change? And I would say, well, what I can see, what I can read about what you're doing, although we haven't met before, this is exactly the impression that you get once you start the conversation with you. That you've got all this integrated.
You are very kind. I don't think to be able to do all this, but I think that we have basically, from one point of view, do our best to, as you were saying, to combine different knowledges, to combine different point of views. But at the same time, I think the fourth we should do is also to try to put our eyes in the eyes of the other living species that are cohabiting with us. So it's also about empathy. It's not simply about interdisciplinarity and or multidisciplinarity. And this notion of biodiversity considered not simply as a way to give a quantity of the living species, but also to, let's say, try to observe the same environment using the point of view of the others. It's a different way also to talk about anthropocentrism, which has not to be aggressive, but at the same time, it's a point of view that we have to improve, not to abandon. So we need an anthropocentrism that helps us to be so strong to become in condition to enter the point of view of the others. This is what we should do.
Well, thank you very much for this conversation. We've got one last question, which is always the last question in our podcast, which means what is good? What is good in a double sense? There is the ethical sense good, and there's a functional sense good. But it's just a very general question to you. What would you say if I ask you, what is good?
Well, I could answer in many ways. I am a football fan, so I could answer good. It's when my team wins the Champions League. It's not still happening, but in future will happen. Good is, when we plant a tree. We do it very often. And good is love. To fall in love is good. So these two things together are, I think, all the three extremely important.
Football, trees, and love. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boeri. It was a pleasure to have you.
Das war Georg im Gespräch mit Stefano Boeri. In der kommenden Woche sprechen wir mit der Designerin Maria Möller. Sie gründete 2020 zusammen mit Laura Mohn das Startup Talking Hands, das sehr erfolgreich gebärdend Daumenkinos produziert. Wir wünschen euch an dieser Stelle wie immer alles Gute und eine kreative Woche. Eure DDCAST-Redaktion.